Suman Raghunathan, welcome again to ITV Gold. I hope you're doing well today.
I'm doing well. Thank you so much again for the opportunity to speak with you, Aditi.
Of course, we have to get you back here because there's so much happening in the nation. We're in day 3 of elections. Nobody expected to go this far. So let's dig right into it, Suman. I'd like to first discuss some of these swing states and your opinions on it. Let's talk about Arizona. Why do you think Arizona is suddenly turning blue? And what kind of a message do you think that sends across?
Well, first off, I think it's important that we are cautious, right? Arizona is still counting its ballots right now. Many reputable news outlets have still not called Arizona statewide blue.
Right.
So I think it's important for us to, make sure that we are able to really follow the data. What I will say is that I think the story of what we're seeing in Arizona today really began 10 years ago. 10 years ago, Arizona had an extremely anti-immigrant sheriff in Maricopa County, Joe Arpaio, who was famous for rounding up undocumented immigrants, putting them in work camps in unsafe conditions, and really ran on a record of being proudly discriminatory and anti-immigrant. He was investigated by the local government. He was censured by the Department of Justice. Ultimately, he lost his seat, in particular because his opponent really spoke to the damage he had done in the community across the board by really creating a war on immigrants overall. It didn't really matter whether you were documented or otherwise. There was a presumption that if you had brown skin, you were undocumented, and by virtue of that, a danger to public safety. So Joe Arpaio was voted out a few years later, and his decision or his actions, along with in 2010, the Arizona legislature passed a very draconian anti-immigrant law called SB 1070, State Bill 1070, that basically made it the responsibility of every person in the state to prove their immigration status. And it really created, again, a war on really anybody and everybody who was a person of color, who could be presumed to be Latino or really anyone else. Ultimately was struck down by the Supreme Court later on that year. And it sent a clear message at that moment that Arizona at that point was planning to predicate its political future on targeting immigrants. That in turn really politicized and sent a strong message to the state's progressives, as well as to the state's Latinos, that it was time for them to begin to really build political power and take a stand in the political sphere as well as in the organizing sphere against anti-immigrant policies. And so, now 10 years after SB 1070's passage and being struck down, we see organizations that have spent several years on the ground in Arizona registering, engaging, and turning out Latino and other voters. And that's part of what we are seeing that is creating this groundswell of support, not throughout the state, but in really highly populous metro and suburban areas of the state. It's why we're seeing Mark Kelly still being ahead of Martha McSally for a special Senate seat. And it's why we're seeing the possibility, even still at this moment, of Joe Biden being able to take that state.
Just continuing discussion on more of the states, I'd love to get your opinion on Pennsylvania and Georgia. 2 states that we didn't expect would come so close in the race. 2 states that have been red traditionally. How are you looking at these 2 states?
Well, I actually think that Pennsylvania has been a battleground state for quite some time, right? And it's really been on this seesaw for the last several presidential elections. Hillary Clinton did not take as much of the state as she needed to in 2016. Barack Obama did in 2008 and 2012. So Pennsylvania, I think, has been wearing its status as a swing state very proudly for a long time. Again, for a lot of the same reasons that many other states are really seeing difference between the rural and exurban voter preferences of its residents and the preferences of those voters who were living in metropolitan areas. And it's really the story that we're seeing across the nation. So I have to say that I think, I was definitely expecting Pennsylvania to be tough, to again be a swing state. Part of what complicates the voter tally in Pennsylvania is Pennsylvania's state legislature favored by many progressives and many organizers in the state a couple of years ago. So Pennsylvania state legislature says that even though there are any number of ballots that have been cast before the election, election workers and the boards of elections or the elections offices of the state are not able to even open and to start tallying those votes until election day. So in a lot of ways, that almost builds in a situation where you do not know how the state is going to go, particularly given the size and scale of early votes and ballots that were mailed in or dropped off.
Right.
And then finally, Georgia.
Right.
Georgia, such an interesting and dynamic state, one that has seen tremendous population growth, as has Arizona. You have a lot of folks and families who are moving to both Arizona and Georgia from other states where the political environment is more progressive. In particular, in Georgia, you have significant growth in the South Asian as well as the AAPI and the Latino population. So, when you have folks setting up roots in those states, it usually takes a little bit of time, but there is a point at which the political structure and makeup of the state will begin to shift. We saw this 2 years ago with the Senate election, where John Ossoff, a Democrat, came very close to winning his race. Of course, he's now up again against David Perdue. So, I think there's been the tipping point that's been waiting for quite some time. And then the final thing I'll just say about Georgia in particular is Georgia has focused quite a bit in terms of progressive organizations and organizers in the state, like Stacey Abrams and many others.
Right.
Folks have really been focused for quite some time on building up the get out the vote and the voter education infrastructure among Black communities in the state for quite some time. And as you probably know, the demographic that is the most likely to vote on a consistent basis is Black women. And so, I think you're seeing those folks come out in force. You're seeing activists who have built up the infrastructure to contact those folks, to remind them to go out to the polls, and again, to make sure that their voting rights are protected, or at least attempted to be protected, given the challenges that the primaries found in Georgia, where there were extremely long lines, particularly in communities of color, and voters had to really wait a very long while to be able to exercise their right to vote.
Such an interesting race. We're just watching Georgia and Pennsylvania, and just seeing what is happening is quite interesting. We didn't expect it to get there. Suman, how have you looked at these last 3 days? Did you expect us to go this far off from the election day to get our results?
To be honest, I did, because we knew that going into this election, that there would be an unprecedented number of people who were voting by mail, who were planning on, in some cases, voting early, but that the scale that states would be confronting when looking at the sheer number of ballots that were submitted by mail was just really historic. I mean, the state of Nevada passed a law earlier this summer that actually sent ballots in the mail, to every voter in the state. It's never done that before. So you're seeing huge numbers of individuals, in particular because of the coronavirus pandemic, who are voting by mail or voting early or doing both, right? And you're also seeing state and local elections offices that are grappling with a feat that I think they're doing their best, but that they have never really had to fulfill to this extent ever before.
Yes, for sure. There is just so much of a vote this year. There's such a massive, massive turnout. It makes sense why we're waiting so much for it. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump is appearing very angry on social media and elsewhere as well. He's asked for stopping the counting of vote in several states. He's challenging certain states for voter fraud, election securities. How do we look at this, and do you think it will result in anything, these kind of accusations?
Well, President Trump has been alleging voter fraud before the election even happened. So I think it's unsurprising that he's still at this point crying voter fraud. Every pollster and election administrator, as well as academic in the country, will tell you that voter fraud is negligible. It almost never happens. It is extremely difficult in most election jurisdictions to even be able to cast your vote. And so the likelihood or the prospect of individuals casting votes that are not valid is extremely small, in fact, infinitesimal. I think what you're seeing, what it's important to note, is President Trump is alleging voter fraud in states, again, with no substantiation, but he's alleging voter fraud in states where he's behind in the polls. And so the most important thing that I think continues to hold for all of us, regardless of who we voted for, is we must count every vote. I can't say that enough. We must count every vote. And that takes time. Every state has a different law when it comes to which ballots and votes are valid. And that means that we, in a democracy and in what's called a federalist democracy, where states have control over how they run elections, we need to follow the law. Donald Trump and his campaign have promulgated several lawsuits in Pennsylvania. His claim of wanting to have more of his campaign staffers, oversee the vote in Pennsylvania is, not only baseless and without any proof. All of those voter elections offices have cameras. You are live. You are able to see everything that is happening as ballots are counted. And I think in a state like Pennsylvania, there's really no legal resource. If the campaign was planning on challenging the validity of some votes or voters, they needed to have done so in court the Friday before the election. So again, I think that this is more of a sign of the Trump campaign not wanting to, at least in some states, admit defeat or admit the prospect of defeat. Trump's campaign manager yesterday, even before the votes, all of the votes in Pennsylvania were cast, Trump's campaign manager yesterday was declaring victory in Pennsylvania. There is no base for that victory. And I think there's no base for any of the claims of voter fraud or of the challenges, legal and otherwise, to a very meticulous and detailed, and in a lot of cases, time-consuming count of the votes.
When you're looking at former Vice President Joe Biden, I have to ask you, if you were in his place at this point, with President Trump, spreading so much negativity about voter fraud and so on and so forth, what should his strategy be right now at this moment?
I think his strategy has been, and I think continues to need to be, to reiterate his commitment to counting every vote. Shouldn't matter who the vote is for. It shouldn't matter where the vote was counted. Again, this is a matter of, for really the health of our democracy and for the future of our nation that hails itself as a beacon of democracy and fairness. We need to make sure that we are committed to counting every vote, and for us to also be clear and make clear that the voters of this country are not going to let anybody steal the election from them. Yes, nor will we let anybody take away our voting rights. And that means that we need to continue to insist that folks trust the process, campaigns as well as all of us, and that we make it our priority to count every vote.
Yes, that is so true. Counting every single vote, that is the most important thing that everyone's asking for right now. Then how do you look at the incident that we saw in Arizona, where a lot of Trump supporters have been protesting outside the election office, and it's in large numbers. Some of them are not even masked. Are they trying to intimidate the election office individuals that are trying to, give us the results?
I can't speak to the intent or motivations of those individuals. What I can speak to is the impact of their actions, right? The impact of individuals casting doubt on what has been an incredibly fair and transparent voting process that, again, you can live stream and see online, only serves to continue to erode our nation's citizens' faith in our democracy. And I think partly what's so troubling about that situation is there's no basis for doing so, right? There have been no allegations of voter fraud. There have been no allegations that have been proven, I must say. There have been no proven allegations or incidents of voter fraud, of ballots being lost in the mail, of being dumped on the sidewalk. We have seen none of that. And so again, I think that the priority here is that we must trust the voters. We must, as candidates and elected officials, as well as individuals, trust and respect the validity of votes that have been cast. And again, for me, that comes back to counting every vote. We need to make sure that elections workers and poll workers who have been working literally day and night for weeks, in many cases, have the ability to be able to do their job and to count votes that have been cast.
Yes, for sure. I'd like to now discuss the Senate and the House race, because let's not forget, it's not just a presidential race we're also talking about all state level and local races. Currently, the Senate seems to be favoring the Republican Party and the House seems to be favoring the Democratic Party. Say if Joe Biden wins this election, how would that play having a Republican Senate?
Again, I think it's going to play the same way it has, it did during the second term of the Obama presidency, right? I think that we are at a time in the country of incredible political polarization. And unfortunately, we are also at a time of incredible political polarization at the same time that we need government to act. We have a raging coronavirus outbreak that is continuing to experience its perhaps third, maybe fourth wave. We have tens of millions of individuals who are either unemployed or are underemployed. We have a deep need for additional stimulus support to help people keep on going. We have a continued nation that is experiencing the effects of systemic racism and racial inequality. And we have any number of issues ranging from immigration to climate change to, so many other issues that are deeply affecting Americans. And it's coming at a time when the Senate in particular has sent a message, even as in the lead up to the election, that it was unwilling to really do anything to bring some relief to individuals with respect to another stimulus package. So, I think the work, Congress has its work cut out for it, right? Regardless of who is actually in the White House. And it's up to Congress to be able to make sure that it can govern. But I can't say that it's going to be easy if what we have was what we call split control, which is where, we have, an individual of one political party in the White House, and we have a Senate in particular that has an overwhelming majority or has a majority of members from the other political party. So again, I think we look to Washington and to Congress to show us, in particular on the Senate side, that they're actually ready to make things happen.
You just mentioned the stimulus package and, of course, the fact that we're still in the coronavirus pandemic. It's kind of taken a backseat this week, but I'd like to discuss this very important thing. How important do you think it is for them to return back to the talks about the stimulus package right after this election?
I think it's crucial. I mean, Americans have been waiting for Congress, in particular the Senate, to do its job for months, right? The House passed a second stimulus package that had, among other things, additional funding to run the elections. The Senate refused to consider that, and in fact, Mitch McConnell and his fellow Senate leaders made a decision to adjourn the Senate early so that its members could go back to their home districts and focus on campaigning. So again, that sent a message to us that folks in the Senate in particular were more preoccupied with their own reelection prospects or those of their party comrades or colleagues rather than enacting relief for the average ordinary American who's been hurting incredibly. 1 in 7 children in the U.S. is experiencing food insecurity. That means that they don't have enough food to eat. As I said earlier, you have tens of millions of individuals who are unemployed or underemployed. The country is in crisis. Yeah. And instead, Senate leadership in particular turned their backs on that and made a decision to not approve additional stimulus funding to be able to provide some relief to people, at least in the short term.
Definitely. I just have 2 questions left for you, Suman, here. The first question has to be, we are hearing about places being boarded up, places getting closed. There's, news about a possible backlash. How are you looking at the situation? Do you foresee any kind of violence coming in the next few days?
I think the greater threats of violence in particular come from individuals who are perhaps going to be unhappy with the election results, who live in what we call open carry states, and who are perhaps going to be unhappy with the election results. And these are, members of white supremacist organizations. These are, militia movements such as the Proud Boys, who have been calling into question the validity of this election if Donald Trump is not reelected for several months. And, Donald Trump obviously himself has, in the debates and otherwise, signaled to these individuals that if he does not win re-election, that there could be a moment for them to come out and begin to either engage in acts of violence or intimidate people. So I'm far more concerned about conservative armed groups and others, causing problems in locations across the country.
Yes, very, very concerning. Let's hope that, whatever happens is peaceful. People do have the right to protest, assemble, but it has to be done in a peaceful manner. It's so, so important. Rioting and looting is not the answer. Finally, I have to ask you, and this is just your own, opinion on this. I would love for you to give us some predictions for either the states or, the Senate and the House race that you're seeing. I would love to know how you're looking at the swing states right now.
Oh, don't hold me to it, Aditi.
Of course not.
I think it is increasingly possible that either or both Arizona and Georgia will flip, particularly looking at the outcome of the special Senate race in Arizona. And I think it is possible that Nevada will, continue to remain in support of Joe Biden, though again, Joe Biden's lead in Nevada is shrinking. So I think it's very possible that we'll have, a flip. And I also think that, the Biden campaign's, lead that it needs to gap that it needs to make up, in Pennsylvania continues to shrink. And so I think it's possible that out of Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania, that we might see 1 to 2 states flip toward Democratic support.
Oh, wow. That would be very, very interesting. It would change politics a lot if that happens. Suman, thank you so much for your time here on ITV Gold.
It's always a pleasure to speak with you, Aditi. Thanks for the opportunity.
Of course.